Hi all, welcome to Guitar in the Real World. It's Tim here again. Another interview for you today. I spoke to Jake Willson. Those of you who may be familiar with him through his work for the Jam Tracks Central will be aware of his phenomenal abilities. He's also recently brought out his own first album, which came out just a couple of months ago. But Jake also works as a freelance musician, and today we just discussed what goes into blending those parts of one's musical personality. It's quite a long discussion, so I think we're going to end up with a two-part video. Okay, enjoy. Anyway, today's guest is Jake Willson. Welcome to the show, Jake.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's lovely to see you, albeit via the wonders of the internet yet again due to the lockdown, but I guess it's as good a time as any to try and get some of these things done, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of the side project time of year now.
Yeah, exactly. So you're kind of most well known, I would say. Correct me if I'm wrong with this, but in the guitar fraternity, one of the things you're most well known for is your contribution to the Jam Tracks Central output. Yep. That's one of the things you're well known for. But I mean, people who know you through that may not be aware of your sort of freelance and session work kind of side to your career, which covers quite a lot of different bases. But I think I'd like to go back to the beginning and talk about how when you started out on the path as a professional guitarist, what were your earliest experiences of just playing from the point of view of making a living from it?
Yeah. So as I started out, I was really... I mean, it depends where I start this, but basically, I was doing a lot of pub gigs and the odd session. This wasn't enough to really live on or live off, and this was just enough to get by to mean that I couldn't really afford to let go of it and push on. So I was like kind of stuck in a certain way of playing. So what I decided to do was to try to go into academia. So I did that for a bit and really studied up and got my PhD, taught for a while at the university, but just decided that wasn't for me because some other things started ticking along in the background, and it started to become clear that the main path for my career at that point was playing guitar. But in that period, I think what had happened is I gradually moved my operations from sort of a local scene in Kent, where I'm from, to a more London-centric position, and that it took a little while for that transition to be made. Talking over the span of years, but once it had been made, it was opening various doors for me in an unpredictable way, and through that stuff I was heard about, if that's the right term, through JTC. So people, a guy called Paul Harvey, went and found some playing I'd done and then got in touch and was like, okay, do you want to do some of that JTC stuff? And I was like, yes, absolutely, of course. Been a fan for years at that point. So at that point, that's when my sort of career started to veer off, and there'd been so much of that period where I was just not getting enough work and was really struggling for years and years to keep my head above water, so to speak.
Yeah.
Living as a sort of a single bloke in St Albans at the time, and so I basically tried to do everything I possibly could, really sort of diversified gigs, tried to do the JTC thing, original material, all that kind of thing, which then put me in a kind of interestingly diverse income stream position for later on in my career when I started getting more regular and lucrative freelance work.
Yeah.
So it's kind of been a strange zigzaggy path into this, but it took a really long time to sort of get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that zigzaggy path is probably a universal story for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, some people have. I guess some people sort of have certain goals with their career, and other people just fall into things within their career. I mean, I think. What's interesting was looking at the extensive booklet that comes with the practice toolkit, of which I've only looked at I've only scratched the surface of what's in that, and also scratched the surface of the booklet, because I just sort of thought, how many pages is this? And I scrolled through this mighty tome, but there was one little
small book, basically.
Yeah, when the just to sort of in the introductory section of the book, I noticed you did reference something about early in your career, early in your development, where the idea of making it, whatever that may be, comes up, and then you talk about how you kind of go make steps to realise whatever that may be, and your perception, I suppose, of what that will be develops. But I guess that's something that most players who are sort of serious about doing something with their playing, there is a certain amount of that ideology in one's head at the start, and you have to have that, otherwise you're less likely to, I guess, push forward, even if you're still searching for what that end goal may actually be.
Yeah, it's kind of it's almost as though the emotion that's attached to that goal is the thing that pushes you forward.
Yes.
Rather than, it's the thing that gets you up in the morning and all that kind of thing. And it's very, I mean, for me, it's never really a rational thing. It's not, I should do that because it would benefit my income. It's really hard for me to motivate myself that way. It kind of has to be like, how great would it feel to, to finally, whatever it is, tour the world with my own music or something.
Yeah.
How great would that feel? How amazing would that be to, meet people around the world who listen to my stupid ideas? And if you think like that, it sounds very childish, very selfish, and very naive.
Yeah.
But it's the thing that I think is one of the main things you need to kind of hack in order to motivate yourself and make yourself do these things.
Yeah.
Even if it's like an artistic goal. I mean, it would be so great if just whenever I played in that rhythm section, everything just locked in perfectly. Like that would feel great. Or if I didn't come away from playing that gig all the time thinking that I didn't quite do as well as I could have done. Regret can be pretty powerful as a motivator as well.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's funny you mention. You say regret. I've never really thought about it using that actual term, but in my stage of my life, I actually do find myself looking back on experiences that I've had that have taken me to wherever I am now, and think about. And I think there is a certain amount of regret, and I'm not just talking about regret that is to do with personal decisions about what I've done professionally, or decisions I've made in my personal life. Sorry, sometimes it's regret over having done a gig which, on the face of it, looks like it was a really nice gig to have done, but I look back on it with regret because I think in retrospect I went about it completely the wrong way and didn't do the job as well as I wanted to, even though I knew what I had to set out to do, and I knew what was the best approach to take. But when it came to the execution of the job on the day, I look back and think, I still never really made that, never really nailed it.
Yeah. Absolutely. But then I guess that's a kind of a powerful emotional memory which once you've learned it, and you can only really learn it by having experienced it,
Yeah.
that might make you act differently in the future.
Yes.
So like risk aversion for when you prepare a gig
Yeah.
is probably informed by having the experience of not doing it properly because you're a bit blasé about things.
Yeah. I mean, I think because I think I sometimes look back and think if I'd had my time again, I would have done X, Y, or Z differently. But of course, back then I didn't have the experience to know that I should have done X, Y, or Z differently, and you just have to kind of contextualize it like that, because it's very easy to beat yourself up, after the event. You have to sometimes just go, this is how you learn, by having those experiences.
Yeah, and I think some of it, in my experience, has come from like kind of a character flaw I didn't really have a handle on, and then the experience shows you that character flaw, and you can either kind of fight against it, or you can go, okay, well, I should probably look at sorting that out, and it can creep up time and time again, but to have at least become aware of it, it helps going forward. And then when you're finally wherever you are in your career doing something, you don't make the mistake when the opportunity is most pressing.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what one would hope. Doesn't always work out that way, but
No.
I guess that's the sort of the risk we take with this business, because everything's on the fly. No matter whether you are prepared or not, when it comes to the performance element of it, you're still at the mercy of at that moment in time.
And you can't control the sort of personality dynamics of other people either, or their situation. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're the odd one out for some reason, and you're just it's not a good fit, it's sometimes the experience is telling you that it might not be you.
Yes.
And so it's all that kind of thing. I mean, so I think if you're a younger player who hasn't done as much, you might find yourself in that situation and come away from it absolutely hating yourself, or thinking, "Oh man, I need to be like those people."
Yeah.
It's a kind of a warped thing, and if you're lucky enough to have had at least enough experience with different groups to know what the right sort of, or what the most common way of doing things is, and what the most productive way of doing things is. I mean, this isn't so much true in like the more professional stuff I've done, but in stuff that's maybe not so professional, stuff that's like in the sort of slides into the pop world a bit more.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with like kind of artists, I think then there's a kind of reality distortion warp that happens in those, and if you're not careful, you can end up taking some of those values to other gigs and it not working.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I've not had so much experience of that kind of world, but I think I know what you mean though. It's sometimes you just get a feel for the way that people operate, and yeah. My instincts have always been that a sort of a professional way of operating is, I know there's flexibility to that, but there are some basic things that there are basic things I suppose I would expect from myself, but therefore I expect them from the people I'm working with as well. And when those kind of parameters aren't there, it can be a bit unsettling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, again, it's if the end result is good, then who knows what the right approach is. But it's certainly. I guess what I'm trying to get at is the experience of understanding your role within whatever situation, and the kind of health of that dynamic is quite important to how you operate in different scenarios.
Yes.
Whereas if you don't have the experience going through those things, which we've all been there, right, at some point. It's a bit chilly in here. Sorry, I sort of getting a bit cold.
Get your jumper on. I've
yeah,
got to take mine off. I'm too hot in here.
But yeah, I think there's a kind of risk of young players getting a bit sort of twisted as they go, and I think we've all sort of had that a bit.
When you say twisted, what do you mean by that word? Because that word can have lots of connotations.
Yeah, no, I just mean, just kind of making the wrong judgment calls over time.
Yeah.
Based on whatever input. These things can only be remedied by just spending more time out in the field, working with more people. So I don't know how we got down that path exactly, but I guess it's all about what is the nature of experience, personality, emotion, motivation to sort of move on.
Well, but I mean, I think every one of those points is very relevant if you are setting out to be a professional musician. And I think one of the things that I've become aware of over the years is that things can creep up on you and surprise you that you weren't expecting. And a lot of them actually are sort of emotion related. Whereas, you have this ideal in your mind about what it might be like to be on a particular gig, but your actual feelings on the day in that moment when you get that opportunity may be nothing like what you were expecting, and that can have a massive impact on the way that you perform and the way you conduct yourself. Whether you're a good hang when you're not actually doing the gig, and it can impact on your sort of your own perception of what it's like to work in the professional arena, sometimes positively. But
it's pot luck, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's it, and I think it's that potluck element that I think is a slight hazard for setting people off in strange directions.
Yeah, I mean, I think with my own personal experience, I can look at a few things that I experienced in years gone by, and I can definitely say, that was a surprise. I didn't expect it to be quite as challenging as that. I mean, one of my early professional experiences was, I won't say anything about the details of the gig, but I was really surprised at how kind of unprofessional it felt, and how the quality of the playing and the quality of the musicianship and the quality of the delivery of the products was way lower than I expected it to be, in truth. And that was partly down to sort of structural things that I think made it hard for everybody to really do their jobs properly. But even then, the mixture of quality of musicians that you were working with, whether it be quality from a personality point of view or actual chops on the instrument from an execution point of view. And I mean, that really did take me by surprise early on. I mean, I will say that as years have gone by, I've found that I've experienced that less and less. But by the luck of, I suppose, you hopefully move on to the point where you're playing in situations where it is more professional. The quality of the musicianship is just that little bit higher, and no matter what the gig is, there's a kind of a base level that everybody's aiming for, or that everybody has a natural ability to execute. Which
there's a kind of there are a few selection biases, I guess, that puts certain people, character traits, stylistic musical ability things into certain positions.
Sure.
And of a kind of, once we're talking about like the West End scene, there tends to be a kind of a pattern of kind of base personal qualities that you kind of you need to have one of those, for example, that you don't see in all walks of musical life, is a kind of almost like a respect for authority that is kind of functionally unquestioned, right? So it's like the hierarchical system in that you have to sort of develop an understanding of whether you agree with the decisions being made or whatever. It's like, well, you kind of have to understand where you sit in something. And I've sort of, I think we can all be. Before I was a bit more experienced, I was kind of almost looking at like a video game about my performance and how well I did on a video game run.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And then, but what I kind of realized by doing that over the years was I was just making it too much about me in my head rather than the day's work. Right, and that might have been making me less easy to get on with. And this is just something I sort of struggle with, because there's another sort of side of me which is like a bit of a perfectionist, wants to get better and wants to be better each time. There's a kind of there's this kind of view of oneself as an artist is a double-edged sword in a way, and sometimes I don't know whether I have my artist hat on or whether I have my jobbing hat on. And actually, like, the jobbing hat is a more healthy version of me, and like a more easy to get on version of me. So dealing with those kind of sort of traits or sides to my job is kind of interesting in a day-to-day work environment, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think most people who have experienced this will definitely understand what you're saying, because I think I've got a trait, or I had a trait, which is not so bad these days, where I would become quite insular on gigs,
right,
because I'm hung up on just whether I'm gonna play well in a way that nobody else is really caring about.
Exactly.
But it becomes a really sort of, it's kind of a self-centered way of doing things, but by the same token, you kind of have to take care of business, and the only person who's going to make sure you do your job well is you.
Yeah. It's that thing of, if you've done something a bit pants, the sort of tendency to apologize for it is so strong. Like, you kind of need to like acknowledge for some reason. It's almost like you're exercising some demon by saying, I know that happened, please don't, but then there's the other side of it, which is no one cares, and no one wants to like clutter their own story with your problems. There have even been times where like something has gone like quite badly wrong, like a string break, but no one can see the string break. Right? No one can see in these pits. No one can see the string break. And so you might spend like the rest of the time worrying. It's stupid when you hear yourself say this stuff. You're worrying, but like when you're in the moment, there's like kind of weird ego pride stuff going on, and you just want to go like, can I just point out that wasn't me just deciding not to play for like for a minute. I had a string break, and then like if you end up saying it, you go, okay, yeah, I had a string break. And then they go, oh, did you? I didn't notice.
Yeah, well, that's it. They say, I didn't even notice you stopped playing. And you think, nobody's got me up in their mixers. So,
Exactly.
Nobody really cares. They've stopped, I've done this, I've played this show or whatever, umpteen million times. And everybody's happy when I come in, and it all seems to go well. So they don't pay any attention to me.
Yeah. So it's one of those weird things where it is totally down to some like quirk of ego and personality, that you can have a bad time doing some of this stuff, but it's also maybe that quirk of ego and personality is helpful up to a point, and it's all about balancing that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I've done another interview which I will be publishing later. I did it a few weeks ago, and it's basically talking about sort of mental health and anxiety and performance anxiety, looking after yourself when you're on tour and stuff like that. And you know, we do skirt into some of these areas because it's a universal thing, and I think a lot of the time. Also, when you're starting out, you think you're the only one who feels this way.
Totally, and you know, only with the kind of pilot hours with the people around you and the trust that you build up, do these moments become more funny and less like, oh shit, did I just like ruin my entire future?
Less crushing.
Yeah, because you've banked up all the goodwill that it doesn't register as much.
Yes.
I mean, it's funny as well. Like, I was spoken about this a little bit on the podcast that I do called the Guitar Hour, and one of the interesting things is when you do it a lot, like on a kind of daily basis, you get a few kind of 7-8 show weeks on the next to each other. Across different shows, you start looking at your playing under an ever more accurate microscope, and it's never like totally satisfactory. But then there's weird stuff like, you know, how much you're sleeping can affect your mood, and your mood affects your playing, and you know, your concentration levels might go down if you've maybe had too many cold, delicious drinks the night before. So that if you start to notice certain things, you know, I think, and sometimes you can go like 4 really good shows in a row, and you just think, okay, that's all cool, you know, I can just rock up to the next one a couple of days later, and then you're like back to, you know, back to point zero. It's so crushing. It really does that kind of level of being in touch with your actual performance. It does instill a kind of humility that you need to kind of ride the wave of.
Yes.
Whereas I think sometimes people who don't play so much or gig so much, they can amplify themselves, a version of themselves based on a bad memory of a gig, and they just remember like the sort of vague positives about it, right? And so it's a bit like when I'm in a practicing mode, when I'm practicing a lot, it's often like a real horrible 1 or 2 days of practicing when I go, oh crap, I really forgot that I needed to work on all that stuff as well. I needed to work on so much. Whereas if I don't practice for a while, I actually start to think that I'm better than I am. Because I've forgotten like the contact with the mirror in a way.
I get that. As somebody who has not been able to practice as much as I used to back in the day, I completely understand that from a practice point of view, because you sort of end up just becoming, it's almost like your connection with playing music becomes almost passive. You almost forget about all the other aspects of it, all the ambitions, all of the things you don't know, all of the limits to your technique. And as soon as you go, right, I'm going to practice this week, I've got all this, I'm going to do, you know, this today, this Tuesday, Wednesday, this is my practice routine for this week because I've got the time to do it. You know, in my case, maybe the family are away, I go, right, I'm going to be fine. And by I was going to say minute 10, you're going, oh, I didn't know I couldn't do that. Or, oh, there's some really basic things which are really not together here. You know, my hands aren't synchronizing. Or whenever I play between my 3rd and 4th finger, that thing there, I can't do it, even though I can do it when I'm going between my 1st and 2nd finger. And it comes in onto that microscopic level where suddenly you go, I was intending to practice my changes playing over this song today, but I can't even do this fundamental thing.
I mean, there is a kind of confrontation that happens there that, unless you're up for it, can like just not make you not practice. and it is a bit like psyching yourself up for something.
Yes.
Sometimes, not all the time, but just that performing or whatever it is some kind of confrontation with the reality of who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if your eyes on some sort of artistic prize, you're probably always going to come out of that worse for wear.
Drat. That's where I've been going wrong all my life.
I think maybe I've done like 2 or 3 gigs where I've come out and gone, you know what? I think I did okay.
Yeah.
Out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Yeah.
And most of the time now, I'm sort of, I tend to just be grateful if the wheels stay on.
Yeah.
I make that my sort of.
I've spent 20 years of lowering my expectations, basically.
Well, it's not really. I don't mean to say that. I don't mean to say that like you're kind of aspiring to mediocrity.
Yeah.
But actually, what I'm trying to get at is about managing how heavy that confrontation is. Yeah. I suppose. Yeah. On a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And sort of seeing it as like a kind of process rather than a kind of a clash or an event.
Yeah.
I can just imagine as well. There's going to be loads of people who are, much more balanced as individuals, and they go, "What are you on about?" Mm-hmm. I can totally see it, but maybe there'll be some people who might have needed to hear that. So it's always worth sort of talking about it.
I think everybody who takes playing music seriously to any sort of degree needs to hear this. Because it wasn't. I was never warned about it.
Yeah.
I was never warned about any of this, and like I say, it's one of the many surprises that working professionally throws at you. Even considering just if you're doing gigs where you're spending a lot of time in the car and you're doing the driving, that in itself means that you already can't expect yourself to give you 100% performance. Even if you're trying for that, there's a certain amount of concentration reserves that have been used up. Yeah.
Well, there's even I find as well. There's even a thing of if you're playing a gig and there's lots of breaks where you're not playing.
Yeah.
There is something about like like your brainwaves slowing down unless you occupy yourself with something.
Yeah. Well, it's like that with some shows, isn't it?
Yeah,
for sure.
There's different policies about mobile phones.
Yeah.
But I find that with a brief look at the mobile phone, just sort of keeps things going. It's really hard to explain, but it's actually it won't be a distraction because you know where you're meant to be ready. You know what you're meant to be doing. You don't sort of overly take the mick. But the idea being, for me, is that I can just let myself daydream and drift if I don't have any kind of... And you see a lot of crossword, Sudoku, and things like that. But it all that weird gig craft stuff is kind of about staying on the ball, and that concentration reserve is is inevitably going to be either depleted or slowed down by again, did you sleep well? What have you eaten? Have you eaten too much? Did you eat too recently?
Yeah. Well, I definitely. I'm hypersensitive to the way that food and drink affects me, affects my ability to perform. I'm hypersensitive to the way that all extra factors affect me. So it's down to right. How much caffeine have I drunk today? I've got to do this show tonight. I better not have a coffee before the show, or if I do, I'll have a single shot. And I actually think about these things because I know that if I get to this point in the show, I'll or let's say, I need to make sure I've got a banana ready for the interval because I know that by halfway through the second half, I'll be ready to pass out because I've suddenly used all my energy up. And
the blood sugar can just drop and get a bit drifty. It's really strange because it's in those situations where, again, you're confronted with that part of the job. But I think for me, one of the things that's interesting is that a lot of the advice you get from the really seasoned guys are, don't worry about it. And it's true, don't worry about it and you'll play easier. But the easiest way to not worry about stuff is to be like really on the ball, and it just kind of happens on itself, by itself.
Yeah.
Like, if I've had a really good night's sleep or whatever, I kind of get to the end of the show and I'm like, we finished. I can't actually remember reading anything.
Yeah.
You just kind of gotten to the end of it and you feel okay, and you're like, but then in those periods you don't worry about it. But I think it's wrong to think that it's the not worrying about it thing that makes you play better. I think it's a kind of it's a relationship you have with how you're able to not worry about it. If you know what I mean.
Do you find your best performances in no matter what environment we're talking about here, whether it's an artistic or a jobbing environment, do you find that it's a state of mind, basically, rather than even whether you're feeling physically on top of your playing or whatever? I mean, it sort of ties in with what you've just been saying about the physical state, but if we just don't worry about the physical state at the moment, if your mind is in the right place, does the physical side of playing the instrument fall into place better for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think, again, it is part of an embodied thing, obviously, especially with regard to something like sleep. And we're mainly talking about like the kind of good performances here, right? So, but the mindset will be like, I find that as well, if I'm playing well, I will discount any fluffs or errors because I know that there were fluffs and errors that were in some aspect unavoidable. Right? Sometimes these things just happen, and if I'm playing well, I go, oh well, that just happened, it's fine, and it's like water off a duck's back. If I'm not playing well, there's like a cumulative effect, and you can go, that fluff was obviously me because I'm shit. Right? It's so weird.
I still can't play this instrument after all these years.
But it is that mindset, and that mindset is so much easier to drift into if you're tired, not very well fed, or all of those things. If you've had like a disagreement with someone on the street about something, or you got like a disturbing bit of news about something, it's almost like because of the coronavirus, there's been loads and loads of people apparently having like mental dreams. Right. Have you heard about this?
I've not heard about this, no. But
so it's just like everyone's kind of subconscious minds kind of leaping out and going, "Hey, this is really different. Things are changing," and you're trying to make sense of a new world. Yeah. And it's almost as though that if you're doing a gig, really we're the only people who notice this. I mean, it's important to point that out, but ideally you want to have more good gigs than bad gigs, right? But if I've had like some sort of argument or disagreement at home, and there's like a kind of a text or something that puts me in a negative place before I play, it will just keep returning, right? And that like sends you off your orbit a bit, I think. But just as one example of something, where you're having like a political disagreement with someone that you care about, and that can occupy you, like moving into a performing situation. I don't know, what the best way of dealing with any of this stuff is, but I think by kind of naming it, you can control it a little bit better.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, I identify with what you're saying, and it will be interesting to see how many non-musicians would identify with that same scenario, where an extra third-party event would keep returning.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to sound patronising to anyone, but I wonder how many jobs there are around there where you are actually having to so often confront yourself in that way. And obviously, you know, people talk about mental health in musicians as being like a particular thing. For me, I don't think of it as like a mental health issue, as long as it stays within certain barriers. But I do see it as a kind of performance health thing, right? It's not something I can easily forget about it. You know, days on, I don't think about it after. You know, it doesn't dwell on it. But like the train journey home might be, and then you forget about it. You ever had this where you sort of forget about it, and then you start to feel bad. You go, why do I feel bad again? Oh yeah, that's right.
yes, yeah. I know it. But well, you know.